Welcome to an MCU tier list ranking. This has been determined to be the best way to determine the worth of any kind of media lately, so we're gonna do it too. So starting off the list with the best film in the MCU, let's just get it started. We know what it is. It's the first Thor. Now, Thor is just such a memorable film from the Rainbow Bridge scene to Heimdall. There's some great action in this scene, like when Thor he summons a tornado and then never ever does that again. So that's why Thor is on the top tier of this list. Now, next is Thor's brother in Thor 2. Now, people sleep on this movie. Thor 2 did so much better than Thor 1. Thor 1 didn't have the charismatic Loki that we all know. It wasn't as funny. It didn't have a Thor that was actually somewhat likable. And the action in this movie is great. And Malekith's there. But it's still an F tier movie. You know, we're just gonna call this one Thor. All right, all right. So moving on to the next tier, we have let's see here. Real talk, Ant-Man and the Wasp. People, I don't know. Was there anything memorable from this movie? There's a few good jokes, but the villain was pretty bad. The action was unmemorable. The plot didn't really make much sense. And who actually likes these side characters? Like, everyone aside from Paul Rudd is just so bland and boring, which is ridiculous. Well, except for his best friend. But even that scene where he's doing the throwback and just like reiterating everything that's happened, it just felt like such a hollow imitation of the first movies. So yeah, but it does have the best end credit scene in any of the MCU. So maybe it's a C tier. Well, nah, we're gonna keep it there. Following it up next, let's see what else is here. Oh, real talk, the Incredible Hulk. Because Edward Norton. Also on this ranking is gonna be Doctor Strange. Now, I know some people like Doctor Strange. Him as a character is the greatest guy. He's hilarious, he's awesome, he's cool, and he does a lot of, cool, magic tricks. But his movie's not that good. The villain is horrible. Somehow they wasted Mads Mikkelsen person, and he just, I don't know, man. None of the characters were interesting. The action looked cool. That's cool. The movie started off pretty cool with a cool tone, but then it just got so silly and like annoying, with nothing really interesting happening, and just a bad Iron Man 1. We're gonna call this tier the Nah tier. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. So in the C tier, now to me these movies, these movies are like, they're like melted ice cream. They're still good, but they could be better. So starting off this tier, we're probably gonna put something like Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is a lot better than a lot of people remember. It still is super funny. It has amazing characters. It has an interesting storyline, kind of showing Tony Stark living with all the fame and power, and his whole like kind of crazy and like alter ego of just having fun and going crazy with his power. It's a fairly, the villain is something. It's actually kind of hilarious. Sam Rockwell, or he's pretty hilarious, and I'd love to see him return. Some great action, and overall, this is like a really solid movie. Just not anything that's like top tier MCU. Joining it is the first Avenger, probably. Oh no, hey, you come back here now. So Captain America 1, as great as a lot of it is, it still feels like a very phase 1 MCU movie, and not in the great ways where it's a little more gritty, more in the way where it's a little sloppy in its execution. Some of the story points don't hit it. Some of it comes off as very corny, which is kind of hard not to do, but a lot of the plot lines are interesting, some cool characters, and you actually you really get to like Captain America and make him one of your favorite characters. But it just didn't hit the stride to make what made Captain America so special yet. And it wasn't until his second, third, and all the other movies where he became amazing to me. Joining this list is we'll put Iron Man 3 here. Now, people hate the Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3, but you know what? It was clever and it was well done, and I don't care what people say. I know people love the Mandarin, but they retconned it anyways. He's still out there, and he'll probably never show up anyways. but the twist was really solid here. The only problem with this movie is that they twisted it and then ended up using a really bad villain instead, which is horrible. And that final fight scene, as cool as it was to see all the suits, somehow they made that super bland and ended it with a corny Pepper Potts introduction with powers or whatever they did. And this movie tends to drag a bit. For what it was, it's a solid movie. It just could have been better. They have some cool roadie stuff. They have some cool action. They have a really interesting storyline, which I just feel like didn't hit fruition. Taking Tony Stark and making him all paranoid about the events of the first Avengers movie is a really cool dive into like a superhero ego. Someone who's like so confident and always like cocky. To see him like be so grounded and vulnerable, that was probably the best part of this film. I just thought it wasn't explored as much as it could have been, or at least it just didn't hit the stride that it kind of promised to be. So that's why it's just, on that melted ice cream tier. Rounding up this tier, we're going to put Captain Marvel. A lot of people hate this movie, but you know what? I actually really, really like this movie. Captain Marvel, she's a pretty cool character. I mean, her chemistry with Samuel L. Jackson or Nick Fury was really cool. The action in this movie is kind of, it's not that good. But they have an interesting storyline to kind of show how she got her powers, all the flashbacks and everything. The way the story was told was fairly interesting. Has a lot of good comedy, has a lot of cool characters, and it really kind of expands the universe in an interesting way while keeping, relevant to the rest of the MCU and introducing some new characters. So this B list is going to be movies that are really close to great, but are still just not there yet, but still really solid films. So I think the best thing that describes that is probably Ant-Man. Ant-Man is surprisingly so refreshing in the MCU, has this heist kind of feel to it, has a really cool introductory character with Paul Rudd. Ant-Man, the visuals and everything they do to emphasize that power set, that world, the way they like shrink him and everything, that was so super interesting. It was so visually appealing. They have some of the best action scenes in my opinion that I think are slept on. Yellow Jacket's fights versus Ant-Man, especially when they're falling from the airplane, is some of the most creative fights I've ever seen, and it's just not brought up enough, but it's so fun and action packed. The comedy is all there. It does everything that Ant-Man and the Wasp tried to do again, but did it a lot more interesting. Aside from the villain's always just kind of meh. The only thing that kind of holds us back is that Hank Pym is not the best character in my mind. He seems kind of bland, and I know he's supposed to be that like old kind of guy who's just like old guy, but it just never hit. It never hit that tone that I needed it to be. There's a few things holding it back in terms of maybe not scale, but just in terms of like storytelling is a little generic and pretty fairly straightforward origin story. But for what it was really solid. Next, we also going to put Age of Ultron here. People sleep on this movie and they always like hated it when it came out, and that really made me mad. Was it as good as the first Avengers or any of the other Avengers? No, but it felt like such a Saturday cartoon kind of feel, where it was just a straight storyline. An interesting villain kind of comes up and they come and beat the villain. They have a lot of new characters like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who it's kind of good he died, but Scarlet Witch is a really cool introduction. Vision is a cool introduction. It really grows on the Avengers as a team. Something that, the first movie is really them getting together. The last couple movies are kind of like their finale, their big, cosmic battle. But this is a very good mid-tier battle, in my opinion, and a mid-tier villain where, even though a lot of people didn't like the handling of Ultron, and I agree that towards the end of the film, he wasn't as much as he promised and it kind of fell flat. This movie really kind of grows on the Avengers as a team, kind of shows their growth, shows some of the separation that they go through in phase 3, and handled a lot more than it probably should have. It was a bit claustrophobic, but overall still really solid movie, fun, and had all the characters we love and did them justice. Okay, so moving on to the A tier, I think one of the first movies that belongs here would be the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, first Guardians of the Galaxy, obviously, is such a refreshing movie. Everyone loved it. It was such a weird mix-mash of like space sci-fi that we hadn't seen in the MCU yet. We hadn't had that cosmic film, and getting such a ragtag group of characters and putting them together in a lot less of a beautiful poetic way than they did with the Avengers was really interesting to see. You had a great comedy, a great tone, and a tone that kind of set what the tone was going to be copied for like the phase 3 films and movies going on. So Guardians of the Galaxy definitely A tier. Also up here, I know people don't like it as much, and I don't care. I think Guardians of the Galaxy 2 maybe not as good as the first one, but still deserving of the A tier. I think it starts off a little slow, but once you do everything with ego, and maybe because I don't know the comics that well, actually, I really don't. The ego twist was still good enough for me, where you knew he was gonna be evilish, but the way they did it was like really compelling. The way that you find out he's the one who killed his Quill's mom, that was amazing to me. You have some really cool action in here. You have some really good storytelling. You have a lot of heart in this movie, especially with all the Yondu stuff. And you have some really dark scenes, especially when they kill some of the space pirates. There's a lot to this movie and a lot of like layers that I think people don't really appreciate enough. And it's different from the first Guardians, which is a little more straightforward and a little more fun. I feel like this tried to take a few more risks with things, and I think some landed and some didn't. But overall, it's still an A tier movie. Joining this is the first Avengers. Now, the first Avengers at the time was phenomenal and such a crazy idea that somehow worked. And guess what? It still is, because the first Avengers holds up really well, surprisingly. Some of the action and some of the scale of it isn't to where some of the newer movies are, but the Battle of New York still holds as like such an amazing set piece of just a lot of elements coming together. The way they combined all the different personalities of the Avengers, people that even in their first MCU, like phase 1 MCU films, weren't that compelling, they made them even more interesting when they all came together. The plot line's fairly interesting, Loki's a great villain, and everything in this movie just really worked well, which means it deserves that A tier. Also in the A tier is Black Panther. Black Panther, I don't know, it's just a really solid movie. T'Challa's like the best guy. They had some dope music in this movie, and Killmonger was a great villain, and Wakanda is just like the coolest place ever. And this movie, there's a reason everyone loved this movie, and made T'Challa all sad by yelling Wakanda forever for the next 2 years of his life. So that's that. Also joining this is, we'll say, the first Iron Man. Now, the first Iron Man might be a little bit lower on the A tier. It might even be kind of that B plus, A minus tier in my opinion, but it still holds up as like the granddaddy of the MCU. Everything that they did with the first Iron Man was new, fresh, and interesting. An origin story of a character that is unlike a lot of the superheroes we have been used to up to that point. Someone who didn't really care about his identity, someone who was a lot more cocky, someone who just was a rich, brave, smart guy who's not Batman. It's just a lot of risks were took with this film, and it really just set the tone of the MCU for 11 years, and created a formula that still works to this day. Also joining this is, we'll say, Spider-Man Homecoming. I hate that some people don't like this movie, because you know what? It's actually probably, one of the top tier Spider-Man movies, which I don't know if that's saying a lot, but Spider-Man Homecoming nails the tone and the kind of coming of age story that this really sets. The way they integrate Spider-Man into a universe that was already so flourished is really well done, with making Iron Man his kind of mentor father figure. And it's an interesting twist on their usual Spider-Man formula. This could have been a very safe, kind of generic film, after 2 reboots already with the Spider-Man character, but they gave it a new twist, put a new character, a new personality on this, and I think Tom Holland is everything I could have asked for in a Spider-Man. Now, rounding up this list, man, we'll put Thor Ragnarok. I love Thor Ragnarok. It is probably one of the most surprising films in this whole MCU, just because of how good it was. The way they remade Thor's personality, gradually over their films, I think they're starting to realize more of what he should be, but I think in this movie they're just full Guardians of the Galaxy and just made everything amazing. Such a weird sci-fi space adventure that actually gets dark in a lot of moments and has a lot of deep character moments, but it's just probably one of the most rewatchable and fun and hype MCU movies, which is why it's like that A plus tier. For me, it's definitely a top fiver. Now the S tier, let's just be real, we're just gonna call this the Russo brothers. Yeah, let's just be real. So if I had to do them in order, though, Civil War would probably be last there. It's definitely a Russo brother film, so it definitely deserves to be on this top tier. The only really fault I have in this movie is I felt like the whole battle in Germany in the airport, it just didn't have the tone that it would probably should have. And I know the MCU tries to go for a mix of dark and light tones, but I think the final battle with Iron Man, Bucky, and Cap is probably a lot better than what we actually got in the airport, and kind of what I was hoping tonally for that airport battle to be. But with that being said, everything else is like amazing, and the story's interesting, the twists are great, the action's amazing, and it's an interesting take of two kind of mentalities that you could see easily and agree with both sides in terms of superheroes and how they would fit in a real world. It feels very grounded and something that you kind of forget when you watch these just like huge, big cosmic characters fighting for the fate of the universe, when this feels a lot more grounded and real. Also in here, Winter Soldier was probably the best movie up until Infinity War and Endgame came out. I mean, Winter Soldier just made Captain America kind of the best MCU character, I guess to say, until I guess Thor Ragnarok, which is kind of tricky. But Captain America, this is the movie that really showed why he is the epitome of everything that is good about people, physically, mentally, socially, and just in terms of his confidence, his values, and everything. I could keep on going about Winter Soldier, but let's just be real. We know it's good, and there's nothing new I'm going to say here that people haven't already said. But with that being said, we're just going to put Infinity War and Endgame together. These movies are just some of the best films ever put into screen, just because of how much it took to combine all this into two final films. I feel like, people take for granted the fact that these are just comic book movies, they're just blockbusters and everything. I mean, what has been completed by these two films is just something that I try to give as much appreciation to as possible. The fact that these movies are so good, and I mean top tier movies, some of the best out of a 22 franchise, that these movies pack in all these characters, never feel too bloated. They give almost everyone a good chance to shine, a chance to grow and develop, show satisfying arcs end and begin, introduce a new villain, or not really a new villain, but bring into the forefront Thanos and make him one of the most, memorable pop culture icons of all time. Gives us the snap, give us everything that, the return of all the Avengers and the end of Endgame, everything that they do in this movie, is just in these two movies, I should say, are just so memorable and iconic. And I mean, I think looking back, we're going to realize how big of an achievement all this was. And I know people are praising it now, but 10, 20 years from now, this is still going to be held up as like on such a pedestal of what it achieved for the whole MCU. So with that being said, this is my tier ranking. If I actually rank these movies in order, which hopefully is another video, if I ever make any more, it would probably be a bit different from this. But if I have to do it on a very a very defined scale of Thor to Russo brothers, this is probably where we'd be at. But if I'm being honest, I kind of like all these. I've rewatched all of them multiple times, except and yeah, they're all great and I love them, and yeah, appreciate you watching. So yeah, do your own tier list. Let's see where it's at.